Welcome back to Contraposition and our lovely podcast with me and Emil. Today we have a very important guest, a good friend of Reiner Fuellmich, and he's going to walk us through what is going on with Reiner and everything surrounding his case. So, Dexter, you are very welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much, Ida. Thank you, Emil. It's always an honor to be on your podcast. Thank you so much for having me.
Dexter, will you, for those who don't know, will you give us the backstory? You can go back as far back as you would like with the case of Reiner Fuellmich, why we are talking about him today, and what is going on around his case.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ida. Everybody knows that's basically your viewership. That Reiner played quite an instrumental role in exposing the COVID-19 pandemic. And as a result of that, he basically had a mark on his back. And that is a targeted mark where the system was after him to ensure that he doesn't actually expose the true nature of the COVID pandemic. We all know that as from 2020, 21, and up until now, the whole truth has not been revealed yet to some extent. And Reiner was on the forefront in exposing the mechanisms behind the scenes. And as a consequence of that, the system was actually hunting him down in a sense. And what I basically mean by hunting him down, if we actually then go back as to how Reiner landed up where he currently is, and that is in Rosdorf prison in Germany, was that on the 30th of October of 2023, he was abducted. And the reason why we say that he was abducted on the 13th of October 2023 in Mexico is that there was no set procedure set in motion for his arrest or detention at Tijuana. There was more like a collaboration between the Mexico authorities and the German authorities on behest of the German prosecutors. And the case basically sprouts out of a criminal proceeding or a process that was instituted by three of the Berlin attorneys against Reiner. And with that, we are talking about 18 charges that was laid against him, and the main of which was the embezzlement. So what then transpired was that he and his wife, Inka, they actually had some problems with their passports. And they were communicating with the consulate in Mexico. And there was then an arrangement that they will go and pick up their passports and basically then their visas at the airport. But to their surprise, when they arrived at the airport, Reiner was detained. Inka was detained as well, but at a later stage, she was released. And Reiner was then informed that he need to be sent back, deported to Germany. And not a lot of information was basically forthcoming. It was more to say that a mission completed. And when I say mission completed, that was the collaboration between the Mexico authorities, and that is then the authorities of Germany itself, where they then laid a trap for Reiner under the auspices that he needs to actually come, renew his visa. He will basically pick up his passport with the visas itself. But unfortunately, that was not the case. So he was then ultimately detained in Tijuana. He was then flown to Mexico City, then ultimately then to Frankfurt. This all happened on the 13th of October 2023. And when he arrived then in Frankfurt, that is then where Reiner got to know about what the arrest and detention is basically all about. And that basically sprouts out of, like I've already mentioned, criminal proceedings, which has been instituted by the three Berlin attorneys. And based on that, they have laid this criminal charges on the basis that Reiner has embezzled almost like 700,000 rand. But that's when you actually have regard to all the other 16 charges as well, also with the 2 charges of embezzlement. They ultimately then said, then on that basis, Reiner needs to be incarcerated. But what is also then important that we need to understand, and the viewers needs to understand, is that it was not just that the Berlin attorneys was after Reiner. It was much more like a collaboration also with the Berlin attorneys. And there is also then the special forces within Germany. And they then work together in order then to detain Reiner. So when he arrived in Frankfurt, he was then processed. And from that process, he was then taken to Rosdorf prison, where I believe currently he is actually still. And then last week, he was found guilty, and he was given a sentence of 3 years and 9 months. But there is only just on the 2 embezzlement charges that was instituted against him. I have actually also then said at the beginning that initially there were 18 charges, but 16 of those charges there was no prima facie evidence basically then to proceed. And the court also then felt at the onset that there was no need to continue with those 16 charges, but then only the embezzlement charges. And the embezzlement charges, that is then the loan contracts which Reiner took out. It's the personal loan contracts in the total amount of 700,000 euros. First, he actually took out 500,000 euros, a loan from the Corona Investigative Committee, and then ultimately 200,000 euros from the Corona Investigative Committee. So based on that loan agreement, he was then found guilty of embezzlement. And as a consequence, he is now basically currently in prison, as I've already actually also stated in Rostov. So that is basically just a broad overview as to where Reiner currently is, how he basically landed up where he is at the moment. And also what is of significance is, and this is what the viewers also needs to understand, is that although the evidence was presented in a light of 16 charges, which was not actually where there was no trial for those 16 charges, but those 16 charges, the court actually felt, like I said, there was no basis to proceed, and it was only then just the 2 charges that he faced, and that was then the trial that culminated ultimately in the verdict that was handed down, that was last week of 3 years and 9 months.
Okay. Let me ask you about the Corona Investigative. The money, where did they come from the beginning? What is he actually, what is he charged of embezzling? Whose money was that?
Okay. Very, very good question that you've actually posed. What we need to understand is that the Corona Investigative Committee was basically a non-profit organization. So they were extremely reliant on donations from the public. So the public could actually donate money to the Corona Investigative Committee with the main objective so that they can actually continue the mandate of investigating what is the true roots of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the loan agreement that was taken out, first of all, was premised. And it's not just him that has actually taken out the loan agreement, but it was actually also then the other partner of the Corona Investigative Committee that also took out a 100,000 euro loan agreement. And that was mainly basically done on the premises that if they don't actually secure the funds of the Corona Investigative Committee, there's a likelihood that those funds are going to be taken by the state, which was also at the time evident with other non-profit organizations that was doing almost like the same kind of work as the Corona Investigative Committee during the COVID-19 pandemic, exposing the false narrative of the COVID-19 pandemic. And on that basis, they have taken, if I say they, that is actually Reiner and then his partner, took an executive decision that we don't want the donations to be taken. So we're going to have to be proactive. And in order for us then to be proactive, also understanding that the Corona Investigative Committee is a juristic person, so they can't just step into the funds and take it and not actually record as to what is happening with the funds. So what they then decided was that they are going to enter into loan agreements. And through that will be personal loan agreements. So they've set up a loan agreement contract, which was actually also then headed up to the court as evidence. And on that basis, they then secured 700 and then the 100, that is basically 800,000 euros of the Corona Investigative Committee donations. And as a result of that, what also brings a little bit of a complication with this whole scenario, with this 700,000 and the loan agreements, is that the viewers also needs to understand that when we go back into a little bit of history, and the history is to the extent that there were four co-directors of the Corona Investigative Committee from the onset. So, and even the viewers will also then reflect and in a sense as well also then remind themselves that when they actually set in and they listen to the Corona Investigative Committee, normally there would be four individuals that would be present. It will be Reiner and then it will be the other three co-directors. And the reason why this is so important and this is so vital, and this is where I am also trying to wrap my head around, it's because why we are talking about a juristic persona, the Corona Investigative Committee, which I'm going to name as Corona Investigative Committee 1, that was not registered, that was brought into existence by four co-directors, which was quite evident as from the onset. Ultimately, two of the co-directors lost interest, so they were much more in the background. But remember, it was not a registered Corona Investigative Committee 1. Ultimately, the work had to continue. Donations actually started to come in. And then Reiner and then the other co-director, they continued. But what they have done, which is of extreme importance, they've then registered this Corona Investigative Committee 2. So now we have Corona Investigative Committee 1 not registered. Two of those directors, co-directors, lost interest. They were much more in the background, and to some extent as well, also they've lost interest in proceeding with their duties of the Corona Investigative Committee, and it then fell on the two co-directors of Corona Investigative Committee 2, and that is Reiner, and then the other co-director. So why that is of significance is that when you have in regard to the criminal complaint that was instituted against Reiner, it was done not by Corona Investigative Committee 2 co-director, of which Reiner had a 50% share, and then the other co-director had a 50% share, and this is the registered Corona Investigative Committee. However, it was instituted by the other two co-directors of Corona Investigative Committee, one which was never registered, of which those co-directors lost interest. And they that actually, when they saw that, oh my goodness, there is funds coming in, and it's huge funds that we are talking about. So now they also wanted to get in, and they then said, no, we are going to institute this criminal complaint, and the criminal complaint on the basis that you have taken money, you, Reiner Fuellmich, without the necessary authorization, because we are also co-directors. But remember, this was not the contract that was entered into was not Corona Investigative 1, it was Corona Investigative 2 and Reiner, Corona Investigative 2 and the other co-director itself. Yeah. And that is very, very important for the mere fact that when you talk about embezzlement in terms of the German criminal code, one of the basic requirements or bare requirements for embezzlement is that you must take money, or maybe you can actually say anything of monetary value, without the consent, without the knowledge of the owner. So the money, donations, getting back to your question as well also, the money, the donations, which actually was owned by Corona Investigative Committee number 2, and where they then entered into a loan agreement that is between Reiner, Corona Investigative Committee. So that was everything done above board. Nothing basically under the carpet. There is a written loan agreement to that extent, which has been handed up as evidence to court, and of which the court basically just said no, in a sense, we're not even going to have due regard to that, on the basis that we feel that Reiner Fuellmich has actually a case to answer. And it was then on that basis that they then proceeded with this 2 embezzlement cases against Reiner.
It's an interesting story. Is this the German government actually went and picked Reiner up in Mexico? Is that a normal procedure to do that with only 700,000 euros?
No, not at all. And why I say not at all, for the mere fact that when you have due regard, if you talk about a criminal complaint against anybody, especially now we are talking about a citizen of the German country, what needs to happen based on the criminal case that has been instituted? Yes, when we talk about criminal case, normally it is instituted on a prima facie basis. And on a prima facie basis, yes, now it needs to proceed. The person needs to be arrested and then ultimately detained, and then been given an opportunity to state his version during the trial proceedings. So what happened in this case scenario, and this is also one of the red herrings, if one have due regard to the whole case and how this whole matter with Reiner has actually played out up until now, I have actually surmised it as 4 red herrings. So the question that you have posed basically relates to the first red herring, and that red herring is that the German authority did not have any authority to detain Reiner in a country which was not Germany, which was outside of Germany. What they were supposed to have done, they were supposed to have actually instituted the necessary protocols when it comes to taking out a supposed or alleged criminal from another country. So there's a set procedure that they were supposed to have actually set in motion, which they have not actually set in motion. Instead, and there is evidence to that extent, which has actually been led during the trial, where the state prosecutor, and when I say state prosecutor, I say the junior state prosecutor, which actually ultimately took over the case from the senior state prosecutor, and this state prosecutor in cahoots with the Mexican authorities, and then ultimately the consulate in the German consulate in Mexico, they have came up with a concocted story. And that concocted story is that if we have to follow due process, the due legal process in getting Reiner back into Germany, that is going to take a lot of time. Reiner will be given an opportunity to basically state his or give evidence or reasons as to why he cannot be deported back to Germany. And then what they've done, they have then came up with this elaborate scheme. And that is that we are going to lure Reiner and his wife on the basis that, yes, they need to come and pick up the visas, passports. And then on that basis, instead of actually following due process, we are going then to detain him, then take him to Germany so that he can be on German soil. And then once he is on German soil, then we are going to then continue with the criminal proceedings against him. What is of importance as well also is that by the time that Reiner actually arrived in Germany, yes, there was this criminal case that was instituted against Reiner, but however, there was no warrant of arrest for Reiner. When he arrived, it was only then after approximately, I think, 2 or 3 days when he had an appearance before a judge in Frankfurt that he got to realize as to what this whole detention, abduction, detention basically has all to do and what he is currently faced with in the German judiciary itself. Yes, yeah. What is also of importance that I would like your viewers also then to understand, and this is then when it comes to the second hearing. And the second hearing is that in terms of normal, even common law procedures, there is a golden principle of aude alterum partem. And what that basically means is that any person that is accused, an alleged offender must be given an opportunity to actually set forth his or her case. So what basically in Germany we are talking about, they also adhere to the principle of the aude alterum partem principle, which means that an opposing party, and in this case in a criminal matter, we are talking about an alleged criminal, like they said, Reiner basically embezzled, so it's alleged criminal. And then on that basis, in terms of the German Criminal Code section 163A, there must be an interrogation process before the matter basically then proceeds. So yes, how it works is that a complainant will go, lay criminal charges. On receipt of those criminal charges, it will then be, in terms of section 163A, that alleged offender must be given an opportunity that is then through an interrogation process to basically put his version. It will then be from that point onwards where it will then be decided, is it possible or is there sufficient prima facie evidence for this matter now then to proceed to trial. This did not happen in Reiner's case. He was not actually given an opportunity to place his version during the investigative process. And that is the second hearing. That definitely, I believe that the court was supposed to have actually flagged. One, the court was supposed to have actually flagged the basis as to how Reiner was brought back to Germany. That's one red herring. And number two, that Reiner was not given an opportunity to be interrogated in terms of the criminal code of the section 163A, which I have mentioned. And then on that two grounds alone, Reiner was supposed to have been released. And even when you now look at the verdict, that is more than sufficient grounds, if you just go on those two grounds, for an appeal to be then successful.
A question about, he was sentenced to 3 years and 9 months. But right. He already been I'm not sure, but it's well over 1.5 years he's spent in jail already. Why is that not excluded from the total time? I don't
Okay.
understand that.
I think it is very important that we need to understand here, we are talking about pretrial detention. So in terms of the German Criminal Code, and I think it is section 1511, that clearly stipulates that when an alleged offender is in pretrial detention, that pretrial detention needs to be deducted in the event that the alleged offender is found guilty. So some of the time that Reiner actually spent in pretrial detention, that was deducted. However, here comes the kicker. And the kicker is that 5 months of the 18 months by the time when the verdict was basically handed down, the court actually said that they are not going to allow Reiner to benefit or to be credited that 5 months. Instead, he will basically just be credited from the 18 months, that will be your 13 months for the pretrial detention. And the reason that the court basically give for not crediting Reiner that extra, no, I won't even say extra 5 months, because when it's 5 months, he already actually spent in pretrial detention. And in terms of the criminal code, German criminal code section 1511, it is supposed to have been credited. And the reason that the court actually stated is that according to the court, the defense actually wasted time. So when we go and we start now zooming into wasted time, one also then you need to have a deeper look. Why would the court actually say wasted time? When we have the due regard to the trial procedures, you will see that there is some other red herrings as well also. And then this then basically brings us to the third red herring. And the third red herring is that Reiner has made it clear through his defense attorney, that will be the lead attorney, Claudia Jaworski, that they would like to call certain witnesses in order then to amplify his case before the court. And the court, to a certain extent, basically just refused. Up until a point where the court said, okay, well, we are now going to allow you as defense to call those witnesses. But then by calling those witnesses, we are going to limit the extent of the questions that you can basically put to these witnesses. And that, for me, is a red herring, because when you look at a judicial process, judges must not interfere and cannot interfere when it comes to court procedures. They are merely basically there just as arbiters. They must observe. Yes, to a certain extent, they can basically curtail a trial proceeding. But when it comes to, in particular, criminal trial proceedings, it is very rare that the courts will actually limit the defense to actually call certain witnesses, and with that witnesses itself, if then ultimately allow the defense to call those witnesses, to limit the type of questions that the defense can actually pose. And when you have them due regard, when the verdict was handed down, and that was then the 5 months was not credited, the judicial presiding officer then stated that he is not going to credit Reiner that 5 months from the 18 months which he already actually served, on the mere basis that Reiner, that's the defense, actually delayed this whole process. So I find it very, very strange, because right to the extent that this court has actually interfered in the evidence that was supposed to have been presented, and even though so presented, the limitations that was actually placed to what extent those evidence for this particular witnesses can actually be let in court by the defense. So that is the third hearing which I've actually identified. And that is also then a very good ground of appeal, because judicial officers must not step into the fray. This is a battle between the state and then the alleged offender, and they need to be given the latitude to conduct the trial where especially the defendant can actually prove his innocence beyond a reasonable doubt, because when the bar is a bit higher, when it comes to criminal proceedings, and that is that there must be, or the state needs to actually prove their case, its case, beyond a reasonable doubt. And then on that basis, a court cannot interfere in respect to the evidence and how the evidence needs to be led. So yes, like I said, that is the third hearing which I've identified, and which is definitely a very good ground of taking this matter on appeal.
So what's the fourth?
Okay, so the fourth one itself, if you go and you look at how the trial was conducted, the trial basically then started when Reiner was then detained in Frankfurt, and ultimately he went to Rosdorf and Göttingen Regional Court. So it was around about, I think it was May of 2024, while the trial was basically ongoing. That the judicial officers then ultimately decided that they are no longer going to allow basically public hearing. So in a sense, what they basically say is that this needs to be a hearing in camera, but I'm using that now very loosely, because that is not what they've said, but I want to drive the point home that when there is no public hearing, there must be a very good ground why you actually say there must not be a public trial, a public hearing. And then on that basis, it will maybe be for security reasons, etc., etc. Then the court will say that the conduct of this trial proceedings will be out in camera. But what the court then ultimately did, not to say that it has to be out in camera, and what it basically all comes down to is that the public, or only just a select few people, will be allowed to attend the trial proceedings. So it's not going to be open for anyone who would like to actually say, oh, well, there's a trial, or Reiner's trial is continuing tomorrow, so let's go and attend and sit in the public gallery itself. Yeah. So what then ultimately happened as the fourth hearing is that Reiner's trial, and that is now the judicial presiding officers, they then actually said, no, we are no longer going to allow the defense to make public representation in court. What needs to happen is that they must put everything in writing. That is basically motion, and then hand it up to court. State will also then oppose it in writing. So everything will basically, the running of the trial will happen then on the basis of paper. So it will not be spoken, and the people in the gallery and even the international audience will not be able to follow exactly as to what is going on in the trial. So that is the fourth hearing, because one, as far as I can understand, the trial was not to any extent called to be in camera, outside of view of the public audience itself. Yeah. But number two, why is it that the court said we are no longer going to allow oral argument to be presented? We are only going to allow that to be done on paper. And that is then to keep the public in the dark, and so that the public cannot actually see the whole trial and how the proceedings is basically then proceeding. So that, in a sense, for me as well, also is then a huge hearing as well. That's the fourth hearing, to say that why was it done like that? And on what authority did the court then actually say that we now need to have basically just motion proceedings? Everything must be written down on paper itself.
It was like you said in the beginning. He had that mark on his back, and this was just a procedure. There was the decision was already made long before.
Absolutely. And what is so important, what you just mentioned now, and the fact that you have mentioned the decision was already made before, is because why. And I think it was during the sentencing of Reiner, where the judge, and I'm talking here under correction, also made some remark itself. I was not there, so this is basically just what I have heard. And like I've said, this is basically I talk under correction. So what it all comes down to is that the judicial officer, when the verdict was basically handed down, or maybe prior to the verdict basically being handed down, the court actually said that Reiner was supposed to have actually known already what the outcome, the decision of the court would actually be. And if he then would have known, and the court said you were supposed to have known, you would not have actually dragged, that's now the defense, you would not have actually dragged this matter beyond what the trial was supposed to have actually ran. And I think the trial ran for approximately, I think, 53, 55 court trial days itself. And then that was also then one of the reasons as to why the court said, no, we are not going to credit you that 5 months, because you knew already what the decision is going to be. But that was even before evidence was presented from the defendant, which is Reiner, which also does not make any sense itself. And that in itself is also then, that utterance by the court is also then a basis. How can you predetermine a matter of which the defense was not even given an opportunity, the audi alteram partem rule, given an opportunity to state his defense and the basis of his defense, and but you said no, you've already made up your mind, and that was also then the reasoning given through to the defendant. I don't think you need to call witness A, witness B, or whatever witnesses you want to call, because we've already made up our minds. And I mean, how can a court do that? There is once again interference from the court in how the defense actually conducted his trial. We must remember here that when it comes to criminal proceedings, the bar is raised a little bit higher as opposed to civil proceedings. And the reason for that is because we are now talking about the infringement of constitutional rights. And a constitutional right that we are talking here is the right to have a freedom, the right to go wherever you want to go, the right of a citizen to have freedom of movement. But unfortunately, it seems to me that that was not the main basis for this trial. And the verdict was already basically made out from the onset, even before the trial actually started. And it was merely basically just a matter of just, oh, well, we're just going to have to go through the emotions, and we're just going to have to basically put up this trial for the public. But also then later on, to the extent we also don't want the public to hear what is happening, we are only going to allow paper proceedings. Basically, everything needs to be written down on paper, and then handed down to the judge, the judicial officers, and then the judicial officers will then actually also then hand down their decision via writing itself. So we can see it is very clear. And there is no doubt in my mind that it seems to be that there is political interference in this matter from the highest echelons of the German government, because one, there is no way that a court can already have a guilty verdict when the matter has not even started. And there is no way that a court that is impartial will actually even allow a detainee, a alleged offender, to actually appear even before them if no due process of extradition has been followed. So no extradition procedure. And the state also recognized that if they had to follow the extradition procedure between Mexico and Germany itself, it is going to be quite a lengthy process. And hence why they actually came up where they've lured Reiner and Inca into, that is the airport in Mexico, Tijuana, and then ultimately abducted him and then flown him through to Frankfurt, from where official charges were then basically then laid against Reiner, and where Reiner's right in terms of Section 163A was not even respected to any extent. So it is clear from the onset that it seems to be that, yes, there is political interference, and there was also evidence led to that extent by one of Reiner's counsel, defense attorneys, where he also presented, and I believe, some documents to that extent, where we are talking about the German Intelligence Services abbreviation, which I believe is basically, abbreviation is PND. So where they actually was behind the scenes, and then basically still behind the scenes in making sure that Reiner actually suffers the consequence of him being outspoken, of him basically trying to reveal to the world based on evidence. And I think this is what we need to understand. It is not what Reiner actually said that, yes, we're not talking about the pandemic, we're talking about the pandemic. This was all based on over 150 interviews that Reiner actually conducted with highly esteemed scientists, journalists, and medical professionals from all walks of life, from all over the world. So then, based on the evidence that was then presented to Reiner, expert evidence by these doctors, medical experts, and the scientific experts itself, Reiner actually said, no, we can no longer talk about the pandemic. It is a pandemic. And for that reason, the people that were behind this pandemic needs to be held accountable. And as a consequence of that, Reiner actually became a target. And we can actually see as to how this whole trial has actually played itself out up until now. What I want to bring the audience attention to is the following. This is not even the end of the road for Reiner. You will remember that as from the onset, I said there was 18 charges that was instituted against Reiner, and of which only 2 of those charges, and that's the embezzlement, the 500 and the 200,000 euro, which was actually then conducted, or basically where Reiner was given an opportunity to answer to those 2 allegations. And what I want to get into now, and this also then to further amplify as to why it is my belief and my other colleagues' beliefs who has actually worked with Reiner, and I believe that attorneys from all over the world as well, also as to why there was no impartiality and why there seems to be an invisible hand actually putting the strings behind the scenes, is for the mere fact that when one actually didn't have due regard as to how the matter basically played out as from the onset. And this is where 18 charges was instituted against Reiner, of which 16 was, the court actually said, no, there's no prima facie basis. That's the regional court in Göttingen, Germany, said, no, there's no basis for us to proceed. So Reiner cannot actually be out guilty for those extra 16 charges. And what that basically all comes down to, those charges, and I'm not going to actually break it down into minute detail, but I'm basically just going to give a little bit of a highlight of what the 16 charges basically pertains to. And that is, it pertains to Reiner's firm having to take on and having to respond, or let me rather say, having to take on some of the duties of the Corona Investigative Committee. And the duties that we are talking about, and which is also in the public domain, and which Reiner has made very clear when this whole debacle basically started with his co-director, and that was that he was not supposed to have actually charged an X amounts of attending to the emails, to the telephone calls of the Corona Investigative Committee, his legal firm. And then on that basis, they said, no, the court actually said, no, there's no basis, because why? This is legitimate work that was done by Reiner's legal firm, and he was entitled basically to charge those fees as the legal firm, not Reiner himself. It is the legal firm, because they have actually taken on the duties of the Corona Investigative Committee. And Reiner has also made it quite clear as well also that between him and the other co-director of Corona Investigative Committee number 2. Corona Investigative Committee number 1 was no longer basically, we're no longer talking about it, because we are now talking about a registered Corona Investigative Committee number 2, of which there were only 2 directors, Reiner and the other. When Reiner realized that certain of the duties that was supposed to have actually been done by the Corona Investigative Committee itself. That was not executed. He took it on himself and he said, okay, well, I'm now going to attend to it to make sure that the work of the Corona Investigative Committee can continue. And also then that the queries that actually came in can be attended to as well. And then on that basis, that will then allow the Corona Investigative Committee to continue with the good investigative work they were doing at the time. So when Reiner took it upon himself, that is now his legal firm, the court, first time around, it's the regional court, Groningen Regional Court, said, no, there's no prima facie basis to proceed with this matter. However, those 16 charges, which was basically where the court actually said, no, there's no basis to continue, that's the state prosecutor then took it on appeal. And on appeal, that charges has now been reinstated against Reiner. And this is now what Reiner is currently awaiting. He is now awaiting a second trial. So at the beginning, 18 charges, of which 16 the regional court said there's no prima facie evidence. Appeal court came back and appeal court said no, this needs to go back. So a full-blown trial needs to be run, and Reiner must be given an opportunity to basically put forward his defense for those 16 charges. So he is now currently awaiting now the trial for those 16 charges. For me, this is also once again a clear indication that it seems to me that there is some foul play somewhere, somehow. What is also important then for the audience and also then to understand when it comes to why there are so many concerns in how this whole matter has basically unraveled against Reiner is that we can see also when we go back as from the onset, because I've also mentioned at some point that we are talking about a senior prosecutor who also had due regard to all the evidence that was put before her, where she ultimately had to make a decision as to whether there is prima facie evidence to proceed. And she then gave her opinion as a senior state prosecutor based on all the 18 charges that there is no basis for this matter to proceed to trial. And it is basically a matter where it is a dead on arrival. So there's no need to even hold Reiner then accountable. And that is on record. And that has been placed also on record before the presiding officers in the 2 embezzlement charges that Reiner actually faced, and of which he then received a verdict of 3 years and 9 months. So once again, there is also then one can see as to how it seems to be that there was interference from the German intelligence services, and it is evidence that has actually been led during a court, and how it all basically played out in making sure that Reiner basically then faced all these charges and then be found guilty of these said charges. Of significant importance as well also that the audience needs to also understand that we are talking about Reiner being a first-time offender. And we are not talking about a hardcore criminal. Reiner is not a hardcore criminal. First-time offender. The state actually asked for 3 years and 9 months. But what is strange is that normally for a first-time offender in terms of the German criminal code, and especially if it is a non-violent crime, and this is a non-violent crime, is basically what one will actually term like a white-collar crime, but I will not even say it is a white-collar crime because everything was done above board, but however, they had to actually make it out as if it is basically a white-collar crime, and hence why then the charges, 2 charges of embezzlement. But what I want to get to is that the way as to how the system has played itself out, and that was to ensure that Reiner is going to feel the full might of the law, and then he will definitely then suffer the consequence of him being outspoken and having done the work that he has actually done. What is important as well also that we are talking about, and I've already mentioned at the beginning, we are talking about two co-directors, 50%, 50%, where the other co-director also took out the personal loan for 100,000 euro, but she was not taken to task. And that is also a big question. Why is it then? Because when we look at Lady Justice has got a blindfold on. And that blindfold is merely to say that the law cannot be a respecter of any person. So what is good for Reiner should have been good for the co-director, or what is bad for Reiner should have been bad for the co-director, but that was not the case. She was basically let go, and Reiner was basically hanged out to dry and then to face the music, but both of them actually entered into legal, authentic loan agreements, but however, the state actually concocted this embezzlement charge on the basis that Reiner had no authority to have actually taken out the funds, and he basically then embezzled those funds in light of a legitimate loan agreement that was entered into between the Corona Investigative Committee 2 and then ultimately that is Reiner.
The loan agreement, was there a date when the money should be paid back, or how was the loan agreement set? Because a loan, if you don't,
you know what, I'm actually talking. Yeah, no, absolutely. I haven't, first of all, I need to actually just state that I haven't seen the loan agreement. But what I can actually garner, it seems to me there was actually, yes, there was a time by when the loan was supposed to have been paid back. And this basically then brings that extra layer of complication. And then why I say extra layer of complication is because we all know that Reiner had a property which he actually sold here in Inca. And with that property that he sold in Germany, he wanted to use then the proceeds of the sale to pay back the loan within the time frame that has been set. But what basically then brings this layer of complication is that now when we go back to the criminal complaint that was instituted against Reiner, we see that it is the co-directors of Corona Investigative 1, and then there is a third person. And that third person, which in a sense is almost like the centerpiece within the whole puzzle, he then actually laid charge to the sale proceeds. When we have then due regard to the initial complaint that was laid against Reiner, it was laid instituted. So it was instituted by three attorneys. That is the two co-directors of Corona Investigative Committee 1. And then ultimately there was then a third attorney. So it's three complainants that we are talking about. And this third complainant that we are talking about, this proceeds of the sale of the house, Reiner's house and Inca's house in Germany, was paid into his bank account. And that then frustrated Reiner's ability to pay back the loan agreement of 700,000 euros. And I think it's between 1.3 and 1.4 million euros. So how he managed to secure those funds, as far as I know, I don't think there was any court process or even a court order that authorized him to actually lay charge to those funds. But there is also a huge big question mark, and of which the defense that is Reiner during the embezzlement charge, two charges that he actually faced, he actually wanted this particular individual to come and give evidence. But the court and the state prosecutors blatantly denied Reiner to call this particular party or co-complainant to come and give evidence so that Reiner can cross-examine him and then find out, and it can then be presented in court on what basis One, he actually secured the funds were paid into his bank account. What was the legal basis for that? And then ultimately justifying as to why Reiner would not have been able to actually then pay the 700,000 euro within the stack of time actually set out in the lease agreement. So when you take that into account as well also, and you put together all the other different puzzles, you can see, it seems to me that it is a very well orchestrated plan that has been put into execution, and you have then all your different role players. But what is also of a very, very, very main, what is of main concern is that why was Reiner not allowed to call this particular individual, and why didn't the state allow, and why didn't the judicial officers allowed him to actually come and give evidence? Because obviously he is a center part of the puzzle, and Reiner is entitled to cross-examine him and to get to the truth and then to put that before court. But unfortunately, that was not given or granted to Reiner to actually call this particular individual. And that in itself as well also testifies or basically reflects on how the court actually interfered in the defense ability to run its own trial in Reiner's own defense.
I remember Reiner was frustrated with the whole situation with the ranch and with selling stuff. I remember he was upset about that long before he got detained. So I guess he knew there was something fishy going on.
Mm. Yeah, no, absolutely. He has made it quite known as well also, like when this whole debacle basically started off with the co-director, and where certain information was put in the public domain, and then Reiner also then made it quite clear that he cannot understand on what basis did he actually take the money. And I believe that during trial as well also, there were submissions made by defense, that is Reiner, to say that the money was actually stolen by this co-complainant. But my reasoning is, I'm not trying to put myself in the shoes of the judicial officers. And if I would have actually presided over the matter, and this is then the main person, and he's also a co-complainant, because his name is basically reflected within the complaint, and I think that complaint is approximately 20 pages. And my concern is, if I would have been a judicial officer, is to say, but I want to know the truth and the whole truth, and I don't want any stone unturned, and I want this particular individual to come and give evidence, and let this evidence be cross-examined by the defense, and then ultimately, as an impartial judicial officer, make a decision based on the evidence that was presented. Unfortunately, that was not the case, and that is once again also an indication that it seems to me that there was an orchestrated plan to actually get Reiner and to, in a sense, almost like put him away, so that he, in a sense, also then don't see the light of day.
So how do you see this playing out forwards? Is going to be a appeal, or is that now when they're actually charging him with the other 16 charges? You can't complain about the first two, then you need to sort everything out and then start complaining from the beginning, or how does it work?
What is important here is that, like I've said at the beginning, we are talking about the 18 charges, of which 16 charges, the regional court ultimately said, no, there's no prima facie basis. That went on appeal, and now it's coming back. So Reiner is now going to have to face those 16 charges. And I think to some extent, maybe they've actually added some charges, but I'm talking under correction here. But nonetheless, he's now faced with a new set of trial that will kick off at any time now, also in the same court, where there will also be I believe 3 judges, a full bench in a sense, if you call it like that, will then be presiding over the matter. And that will also then be with 2 lay judges, basically people from the public, not that they have any legal knowledge, but they are basically sitting in as assessors to assist in the 3 judges that will be presiding over the matter. Whether it is going to be the same judges that is going to sit in this matter, I really doubt, because normally you need to actually get a new set of judges in to actually sit in, because this matter basically in a sense almost like overlapped, and if it is the same judges, they've already been exposed to some of the evidence, so they already have some prejudice. So if they are the same judges that will preside with the same assessors over this new trial, that is also a red herring in a sense, because it should not actually be like that. It must now go to a new set of judges. That is your 3 judges, and then ultimately your 2 lay judges, which is more like your assessors. So what is now currently going to, and how it is going to play out now going forward, is that Reiner will now face those charges. That's the 16, and like I've said, I think there is some other charges that has been added, but I'm talking under correction. And then ultimately, you are now talking about then what is going to be the next step with these 2 embezzlement charges, of which he then received a verdict of 3 years and 9 months. So what's going to happen is that Reiner is definitely going to take it on appeal, because for the reasons which I've already basically stipulated, and we have actually mentioned, according to my analysis, not that I had any discussion with his legal representatives, it's just me from the outside looking in, and also applying my legal mind, and basically came up with the 4 red herrings as to why there is more than sufficient grounds to actually then take this matter on appeal. However, one must also then remember that when it comes to an appeal process also takes some time. So it can be another year or maybe a year and a half to 2 years that appeal process is going to be finalized. But in the meantime, Reiner is then actually serving out his 3 years and 9 months, of which 5 months was deducted. And he was only granted then a credit of 13 months. So that is then towards then the 3 years and then the 9 months. But also he is now currently also in pretrial detention for the 16 charges that of which the trial will actually then kick off at any time. When it is going to kick off, it's not so quite clear, but I think maybe if I have to actually give an estimate, maybe within the next month or 2 months, they will actually now start this new trial. And I know that I think if one actually go, and I'm not so quite sure, if you go on the public domain of the court, I think you will be able to pick it up there some way, somehow, of the charges that Reiner, or the trial, the upcoming trial, and how the charges has actually now been outlined for Reiner then to defend himself in this new upcoming trial. But definitely he is going to take these 2 embezzlement charges on appeal. That is what I am thinking, and I believe that he is definitely going to do it, because there's no way that Reiner is going to let this slide. And we believe and we trust then that when it goes on appeal, that the appeal process can be finalized ASAP, but there's also another question mark as to whether it is going to be done expeditiously, or it is going to allow Reiner then to continue basically serve out his whole time period of 3 years and 9 months. And at what point will Reiner also then be eligible for parole as well also? What brings also some complication is that now we're talking about another trial. That adds also now another delay, and also then will hinder Reiner then basically to come out, because we must also now remember that he is now currently serving a sentence. There is a new trial coming up, and the fear, and I don't know, and one can only hope and one can only speculate, that when it comes to the new trial, and I believe if if I would have actually been defense counsel, I would have actually, at the first hearing, I will actually make a request, but I can't even, you can't, because he is now currently serving a sentence itself, yeah. Because what I wanted to get to is that I would have liked him basically to be granted bail. But even if he is granted bail, he's still serving a sentence. So there's no way he's going to get out. So you can see how they've actually orchestrated and put all the pawns basically in place to make sure that they can actually keep him incarcerated for as long as possible.
Yeah. It feels like this is absolutely nothing to do with the money. It's everything about to do with Reiner's work. So it's always a pleasure talking to you, Dexter. I'm really glad you're taking your time and doing this update. I don't know, Ida, if you got any more questions. Otherwise, we would like the people or the audience watching it to share it as to many people as they can. And we're going to leave Reiner's address so people can send him mail as well. So keep on. He needs all the support he can get.
Absolutely. All the support. That will definitely be much appreciated by Reiner. And I believe that that is what is keeping him in the fight, knowing that there are people outside and they really want justice to be served. And they also want, at the same time, people to be held accountable for this COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
I have no questions. You covered everything beautifully. Thank you so much, Dexter. And I want to tell everyone that is watching this, share the crap out of this video. This is very important, and we really need to show our support. Yes, Dexter, thank you very, very much for this and for your time. And if we have any questions in the comment section from people, maybe we will ask you to take part in another part of this podcast, and maybe, yeah, I think you covered it all, but you never know.
No. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And for me, it was quite an honor basically to lay out how I basically see this matter and how this trial has basically been playing out in front of all of us, and why there is more than sufficient grounds for Reiner and his defense than to take this verdict on appeal. And also then I would like to encourage the viewers, as you have said, Emil, that they need to continue to support Reiner by sending him messages to the address that you will provide, because I know that that is definitely helping him and it is assisting him in staying afloat, and knowing that there are people outside that want justice to be served. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. And you're more than welcome in the event that you would like me to come back to just let me know and we can have another interview. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, and we'll keep in touch.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Ida and Emil, bye-bye.
Bye.